In the previous video, we talked about one interspecific interaction in particular, which was competition. And competition is a negative-negative interaction because the fitness of both species involved is going to be reduced. Their likelihood of survival and reproduction will be reduced. But there are other types of interspecific interactions. We're going to talk about them in this video. The first one's called mutualism. Mutualism is a form of symbiosis. Symbiosis is a broad term. Mutualism is the term we use when both species benefit from the interaction. So in mutualism, you have a positive-positive interaction. Both species are more likely to survive for an extended period of time and more likely to be able to commit resources to reproduction as a result of the interaction. So there's a couple examples up here. We have some coral, and that's what these little transparent looking creatures are. You see how they have these little tiny tendrils? Coral are very, very small animals. And when you think of coral, you probably think of the reefs that they make, but the coral themselves are very small jellyfish-like animals. They're kind of translucent. And inside them, you can see all these colored particles here, and that's algae. It's algae, which is a different species, that is growing inside of the corals. And the algae, because they're on these reefs and they're in these corals, are able to get exposure to sunlight. And they're also able to utilize some of the waste from the corals, carbon dioxide and nutrient waste and all that, as fertilizer and material for photosynthesis. And then they produce sugars. The corals then can use the sugars for a food source, and that allows them to keep going and keep going. So all that beautiful color you see in coral reefs, it actually comes from the algae living inside the bodies of the coral, which are actually kind of transparent. On another example here, on the right, we have a boxer crab. And this boxer crab has these two anemones, and it walks around and it picks up these tiny little anemones, and anemones have these stinging tentacles on them. And what the boxer crab does is it holds them up like boxing gloves. You can see it swinging them back and forth like pom-poms right now. But if a predator comes near, it jabs at them like a boxer. And if the anemone comes into contact with the skin of, say, a octopus or something, or a fish that's trying to eat this crab, it gets stung with those tentacles. So it basically is utilizing this other species as a weapon. Are the anemones benefiting? It actually turns out that they are, because by being carried around by the boxer crab, they are getting more movement of water around them, which gives them more access to dissolved gases. It gives them more access to nutrients. When they emit waste, it kind of spreads around a little bit more easily because they're constantly moving around from one area to another. So it turns out both species do, in fact, benefit from this particular interaction. Classic symbiosis mutualism interaction. I think a lot of people are familiar with this one because it's a favorite of National Geographic documentaries. We have a rhinoceros and we have oxpeckers, a kind of bird. And if the rhinoceros has mosquitoes and ticks and any kind of parasite, like an insect that's a bloodsucker, that's on their skin, these oxpeckers will come by and they will eat those parasites off. And the oxpeckers get food, and the rhinoceros gets fewer parasites draining their resources. This is a benefit to both of these species. So just by knowing that the rhinoceroses are places where they could find a good meal, that makes it much easier for these oxpeckers to be able to gather food resources. So they just go straight to the rhinoceros and they say, yes, I'll look around here for some food. Much easier to pick them up. The rhinoceros, obviously, if you have parasites, not only are they draining your blood and they might be creating open wounds, but also they could be carrying pathogens. So fewer parasites generally means that you're going to have a healthier overall population. Now, one of the interesting things about symbiosis is that a interaction can go from being positive to positive negative if the status quo changes, if the conditions change a little bit. So what these oxpeckers actually are interested in is blood. They eat blood meals. And a good way to do that is just to eat the parasites that are sucking the blood. So if you have a tick that's filled himself up with blood, he's gorged himself on blood, the oxpecker eats the tick, and then they get big blood meal as well. But if there are no parasites available, and the rhinoceros has, say, an open wound, these birds are known to pick away at that open wound. They'll keep like biting at it and getting little bits of blood and bits of scab and stuff, and it prevents the wound from being able to heal over. So that can become a parasitic interaction pretty easily. And this is true of lots of symbiotic interactions. You have a symbiotic interaction with the bacteria in your digestive system, but if they were to escape into another system of your body, and your body has lots and lots of barriers to prevent that from happening, then a good bacteria in the wrong location can become a bad bacteria. So it's not only which species are involved, but what is the nature of the relationship that they are having that kind of determines whether it's mutualistic or parasitic or what kind of relationship they're having. If two organisms have a very strong association with each other, then what can happen is that the evolutionary trajectory, right, the way one species changes generation by generation by generation by generation, the evolutionary trajectory of one species can influence the evolutionary trajectory of another species, because this species is changing. A species that is very closely associated with it might change in a compatible sort of way. And we have two different examples of this. One, we have two organisms that work together, so more of a symbiotic interaction. And then two, we have a predator-prey interaction over here on the right. So I'll talk about the hummingbird and these flowers first. Take a look at the hummingbird's beak and take a look at the shape of the flowers. They are perfectly matched to each other, right? They're the same length. They even have that little curve to them. And you guys probably know that hummingbirds drink nectar. When you want a hummingbird feeder, you just kind of put sugar water, red-colored sugar water into a feeder, and they come at it. So they're drinking nectar from these flowers, and they get pollen on their face when they do this, and then when they go to another flower, they're delivering that pollen and mixing the pollen up between flower to flower to flower to flower. So the flower gets pollination services, and the hummingbird gets food. It gets a food resource. Now, which came first, the shape of the flower or the shape of the hummingbird's beak? Because if the flower was shaped like this at first, and the hummingbird didn't have this long beak, it's hard to see how the hummingbird could actually get nectar from this flower. And if the hummingbird had this why would the hummingbird have this super long beak except to be able to extract nectar from this flower? It doesn't seem like it would totally make sense unless you consider that they probably both started, hummingbird with a smaller beak and the flower with shorter flowers. They probably started out with less extreme adaptations. So originally, the flower probably could have been pollinated by many different species, right? Many different types of birds could have come because its flowers would have been a shape that lots of different beak shapes could have come in and gotten that nectar and spread that pollen around. But maybe the flowers are just a little bit longer than our types of flowers. So this hummingbird comes along, and the members of the hummingbird population that had a longer beak were slightly more able to get the nectar out of that flower, right? So they had a survival advantage. They were able to gather food more efficiently in areas where there were lots of these flowers. And so every generation, the most reproductive members, the ones surviving the best and creating the most offspring, were the ones on average with the longer beaks. So slowly but surely, every generation, the beaks would get longer and longer as those genes were the ones being selected for. Those genes were the ones that were causing reproductive success. Now, from the flower's perspective, it's actually really good if you have a bird that specializes on just you. Because if you have a bird that could come through and pollinate all kinds of flowers, then when it comes and gets your pollen, it could be spreading it to other kinds of flowers that you cannot reproduce with, right? So you're getting all this cross-pollination. Some of it might be useful, but some of it is probably going to be a dead end for you. What would be really handy is if you had a bird that specialized on your particular flower species, and then they are only going from one of your flowers to another flower of the same species, to another flower of the same species, to another flower of the same species. So this hummingbird that was really good at getting the nectar, If the flower got longer, then that would decrease the rate at which other types of birds are coming to pollinate, and you would only get this one kind of hummingbird that has started to specialize in this kind of flower. But as the flowers got longer, the members of the hummingbird population with even longer beaks became the most successful. So the beaks got a little bit longer as well. And generation by generation, the flowers are contorting to make their shape, and the hummingbirds are changing to make their shape. Now, why are the hummingbirds doing this? Well, from their perspective, if they have a food source that is entirely their own, no other bird can actually pollinate this flower, no other bird can come and get this nectar, then they don't have any competition to worry about. And remember, competition reduces your fitness, your reproductive rate, your survival rate. So if they specialize on this flower, it increases their fitness. So both of the species, because of this symbiotic interaction, are benefiting, and generation by generation, coevolution is causing them to become even more and more tightly locked with each other. On the right-hand side, we have a mongoose. Now, if you've ever read Kipling, the author, he's the same author that did The Jungle Book. He has another book called Rikki Tikki Tavi, which everyone read when I was a kid, but I feel like it maybe was not as widespread of a book as I originally thought it was. It's a book about a family that there's a cobra that's going to attack the child of this family, and a mongoose saves the child and kills the cobra, and then they adopt the mongoose, and then the cobra's mate tries to get revenge, and it's all about this mongoose trying to protect this family. And that story comes from a real biological effect, which is that mongooses have a inherent resistance to snake venom. They are resistant to cobra venom. Cobra venom is powerful, right? It can kill an adult human being. It could kill several adult human beings, the amount of cobra venom in a single bite. And there are other snakes with even more powerful venoms. The Australian taipan is one of the most venomous land snakes on the planet, if not the most venomous. And then there are ocean snakes, water snakes, that are even more venomous than that. And you think about it, why does their venom have to be so potent if they cannot take down, like a snake couldn't swallow a human being, right? Like cobras get big, but no cobra is going to be able to swallow an adult man, and yet its venom is powerful enough to take down such a organism. The reason for that has to do with what we call an evolutionary arms race. As these two organisms are competing, there's a predator-prey interaction. We have a small mammal and we have a snake. Obviously, snakes eat small mammals. The snakes with the stronger venom are going to be the best predators. The prey with the most resistance to that venom are going to be the ones that are able to take a bite and then escape and live another day. So every generation, the resistance in the mongooses got stronger and stronger and stronger, and the venom for the cobras had to get stronger and stronger and stronger in order to keep up. So they both kept getting stronger in this sense. Other organisms who were not participating in this evolutionary arms race, well, if they get in contact with this venom, it's almost like we're allergic to it. It's so strong that it would kill us outright. But a mongoose could be bitten by a snake a couple times and still shake it off, and frequently they do in fact kill cobras out in the wild. So this is another aspect of coevolution. Competition can drive evolutionary changes as well. Now, we talked about symbiosis with a few examples. We talked about coevolution from competition, predator-prey interactions, that kind of thing. And we'll discuss those more in a minute. But there is another type of symbiosis that which we haven't mentioned, which is called commensalism. So competition is a negative-negative interaction. Mutualism is a positive-positive interaction. Predation and parasitism are positive-negative interactions. What is commensalism? That is where one organism is benefiting from the interaction, and the other one, honestly, is not being affected that strongly. Right? So two organisms are interacting. One of them's getting a lot of benefit. The other one, honestly, couldn't care less. And a good example of this is epiphytes. Plants, you probably have seen these for sale at garden supply stores. They're sometimes called air plants. This is a bromeliad in the forest, the rainforest. And what it does, there's a lot of competition down on the floor of a rainforest. If you think about it, there are layers and layers and layers of leaves at the canopy of the rainforest. So very little sunlight actually makes it all the way down to the forest floor. There's vines and trees and branches and leaves, and everything is blocking the sunlight from getting down. It's actually very shady at the forest floor of a rainforest. There is more light available the further up you go. So what epiphytes do is they root themselves, or they attach themselves to a larger tree further up towards the top of the canopy. They're not competing for sunlight with the tree itself because the tree's leaves are above the epiphyte. They're up at the canopy. The epiphyte is just down here hanging on to the tree itself. It adds a little bit of weight, but not much, honestly, not enough that a tree would be negatively impacted that much. And it gets water from the rain as it trickles down the tree's bark, and it doesn't require all that much soil, but there's plenty of nutrients up there because, as you can see, look at all this moss up here. There's decomposition happening at all layers of the rainforest, not just down at the soil. So it's getting everything it needs just by being attached. Epiphyte, epi means above, phyte means plant, so above plants, air plants, plants that root themselves in the branches at the tops of trees. So that's an example of commensalism, where one species benefits, the epiphyte, and the other, it's not really affected, and that's the tree. Some argue that even if the effect is trivial to the other species, it probably is negative in some way, but if we can't measure the negative impact, then it kind of qualifies as commensalism as we use the term. All right, so we got a couple of different positive-negative interactions to discuss. One of them, predation. In predation, one organism eats another, kills and consumes another. The predator is the one that is benefiting, and the prey, the one that's being consumed, their fitness is being decreased because they are no longer alive and therefore no longer able to produce offspring, and fitness is the number of potential offspring that you are going to add to the next generation's gene pool. So because this is such a strong determiner of your overall success as a species, this drives a lot of special adaptations. We're going to take a look at them, particularly in the prey. So this is where we get things like cryptic camouflage, cryptic coloration it's called, crypsis. It's a way to hide from predators. And this can occur by a few mutations popping up in the DNA generation by generation, because the color that you have in your skin comes from pigments. And those pigments are made by proteins, and proteins are controlled by your DNA. The shape of the proteins and how they function is controlled by the DNA. So tiny alterations to the DNA can alter the protein, and that can alter what pigments come out. So you can get, a little bit greener, a little bit browner, a little bit redder, a little bit bluer, all these kinds of little adjustments there. And same thing with the pattern of coloration. All of that comes down to the actions of proteins as you are developing as an organism. You start as a single-celled organism, and then you put on more and more and more cells. You become a ball of cells, and then you start developing tissues and body parts. But all of that development is controlled by the actions of proteins, and all of the actions of proteins is controlled by the DNA. So every generation, there are these little fluctuations, these little mutations that pop in. And if one makes an organism blend into the background better, they're more likely to live longer, be able to gather more food, have more opportunities to reproduce, and therefore, since they lived to reproductive maturity and they had a full lifespan, they will add more to the next generation's gene pool. Versus if we had another frog who had a mutation that made it bright white, for example. Bright white on this green background would make it really easy to spot the outline of this frog against all of this duckweed down here in the pond. So predators, like birds flying by that use visual cues to hunt, would be able to spot it, and they would be eliminated from the population very, very quickly. So cryptic coloration is one way that prey avoid predators. Some predators also use this because obviously if your prey doesn't see you coming and you are an ambush predator, that is pretty handy. So I have an owl here using the same kind of trick, and it's the same sorts of mutations and natural selection forces that cause that to happen. The absolute king of cryptic coloration, and most people think I'm going to say the chameleon, is the octopus, because it has this ability to actively alter the color of its skin. It has all of these different cells that are able to open them, make themselves larger and smaller, and depending on which combination of them you're looking at, you get different hues and different color variations from the octopus, and it can match patterns. We've done tests where we put them on like striped backgrounds and all kinds of backgrounds, and their color pattern will match that. That's something chameleons cannot do. But not only that, they have the ability to alter the texture of their skin, many of them do, in order to look like they are part of the background. So you can see this one is making it look like it's part of this this vegetation down here on the ocean floor. But as the cameraman gets closer, it realizes that, hey, there's something that may have made me. I'm going to shift out of active camouflage and use one of my other predator avoidance techniques, ink splash. Really cool. There are other ways you can use coloration to avoid predators, and this is called Mulerian mimicry, warning coloration. So you see this kind of color pattern on actually a lot of different animals. You have one bright color and a contrasting dark black color in order to make it pop even more. Yellow jackets have this, like lots of bees and hornets have this kind of coloration. Poison dart frogs have this kind of coloration. A lot of venomous snakes are very brightly colored. A lot of other types of organisms which are poisonous or venomous will have this kind of coloration. Skunks have the white stripe down the black fur, which indicates, hey, I have a defensive mechanism that predators should probably be aware of because you're not going to like it. And what this warning coloration essentially is saying is, listen, predator, I am not trying to hide. I am, in fact, standing out. Look at how gaudy I am. Look at me. I don't need to hide because I am dangerous. If you mess with me, I am going to ruin your day. That's the communication of these color patterns, these brightly contrasting bright and dark colors here. And predators, especially ones that have had any interaction with any species that utilizes this kind of coloration, like it's been stung by bees or it's tried to eat something that turned out to be poisonous and it got sick for days later, they will learn that, hey, this is something dangerous. This is something I should stay away from. Maybe I'll look for other types of prey, and they will avoid any kind of organism that uses that coloration. And evolutionarily speaking, organisms that are hardwired to take note of that kind of coloration and realize it's significant and avoid it are going to be the ones that do a little bit better. So this is a very effective strategy to avoid being eaten. What I love about this is that it's essentially marketing. It's a brand identity. They are part of brand poisonous, brand venomous, brand dangerous, right? They are wearing the colors that indicate that, hey, I'm part of this group, this category that is dangerous. And just by having that coloration, they are getting this effect of predators avoiding them. And because of that, because of how well this brand, this marketing campaign works for venomous and poisonous creatures, other creatures can utilize the same kind of coloration, even though they are not venomous, even though they are not poisonous, even though they have no real exotic defensive mechanism whatsoever. As long as they are wearing the colors, other species will avoid them and treat them like they are dangerous. One of these snakes is the venomous coral snake, and the other is the non-venomous king snake. There is a schoolyard rhyme that is told in order to differentiate which one is which if you ever come across them on a hike or something like that. And the version I was taught, there's different versions, is if red touches black, you're okay, Jack. If red touches yellow, you're a dead fellow. So on the left, you can see that the red stripe is between these two black stripes, and the pattern is maintained throughout the length of the snake. So red touches black, you're okay, Jack. This is the king snake on the left. And then red touches yellow, you're a dead fellow. This would be the coral snake, the venomous coral snake on the right. Honestly, if you see one of these and you're on a hike, just leave it alone. Right? Don't try to remember the rhyme. It doesn't matter if you accurately identify whether it's venomous or not. Just leave the snake alone. Additionally, there are many different variations of coral snakes. Some of them have white stripes instead of yellow, so there's no guarantee that the rhyme is going to serve you that well anyway. But this is called Batesian mimicry. And this is when one species will take the form of another more dangerous species, even though it lacks the special defensive mechanisms that makes that bright, vibrant color pattern a worthwhile thing to have. And because predators will avoid that, they will avoid these species as well. There's some other examples of some cool Batesian mimicry. You can see this caterpillar and this moth both have this mimicry to make them look like predators. So this one looks like a snake, this caterpillar. I believe this is its rear end, actually. I don't think that's its front. And then same here on the butterfly, you can see it looks like an owl looking at you. And this imagery, right, to any kind of smaller bird or insect predator or something like that would be coming along to possibly eat our caterpillar or moth, if they see that, it's going to ping that recognition in their nervous system, in their brain, and they are going to just avoid it naturally. The mimicry is not always perfect. Sometimes predators do manage to eat them, but that drives the mimicry to become even more and more and more precise. So some insects have elaborate disguises that make them resemble twigs, leaves, like katydids. We have katydids around here. They're the green. They almost look like grasshoppers, except they have a body that is very much shaped like a leaf, down to like veins and things and texture. Some look like bird droppings, and some of them, like these ones up here, look like predators. So that's Batesian mimicry. The Bombardier beetle is a cool predator avoidance technique. This beetle uses chemistry in order to avoid its predator. And I'll link a video where you can learn more about it. It's a short video, but it's really cool. It's only like 4 minutes long. Basically, it has two chemical compounds, two chambers in its carapace here. And when it adds those two chemicals together, there is a caustic, violent chemical reaction which causes this kind of boiling hot acid to spray out, and that is a really good deterrent to like spiders or say a bird that would be trying to come at this Bombardier beetle. So some predator avoidance techniques get really complex and interesting. Now we should never forget about the plants. Herbivory, herbivores, animals eating plants, is another predator-prey interaction. It's just the prey is not an animal, it's a plant. So herbivory is the consumption of plant parts or algae by animals. And like prey species that we just discussed, plants have also evolved numerous defenses, including spines, thorns, and chemical toxins. So let's take a look at some of those. We have some cactus spines. This is the plant equivalent of putting up a barbed wire fence around yourself. It prevents larger predators from being able to come in and just eat away at the cactus. Cacti obviously have a lot of water stored in them. They occur in deserts, so they are a really big reservoir of that nutrient, of water. They need to defend it, and this is the way that plants would go about defending that reservoir of water, with these nice big spines. Around this area, we don't have cacti growing wild, but we do have honey locust trees, which have large clusters of long thorns on them. If you've been walking around, you see a big tree with compound leaves, and you see these these just daggers sticking off of it, these clusters of thorns going all over the tree. That is a honey locust tree. And they serve the same purpose. Even in situations where the organisms that are herbivores are able to get past these thorns, the thorns still make it much more difficult to handle. And making yourself hard to handle as a prey item, as a prey species, means that predators have to spend more time trying to hunt you than they do one of your competitor species. So by making yourself inconvenient, an inconvenient food source, you can cause predators to make this kind of an economic decision that their time is better spent elsewhere. And that's really the goal of a lot of spines and thorns. It might not be an absolutely perfect, impenetrable defense, but it does waste an herbivore's time, and they will go somewhere else instead for food, to a more convenient food source. A lot of flavors that we like actually are developed to make insects go away, as they're kind of insecticides, or they are smells that insects find unfavorable, so peppermint, cloves. Some of the compounds that we take in recreationally actually are developed as insect poisons by plants. So nicotine in tobacco plants and caffeine in coffee, these are both insecticides, natural plant insecticides, and we have selectively bred them through artificial selection, generation by generation, to amp up the amount of caffeine and nicotine in these plants. And in our nervous systems, it still has an effect, because we too are animals. It just has kind of a stimulatory effect. Whereas for some insects, depending on which insecticide it is, it could be fatal or make them sick, or even just serve to confuse them for a little while. And that is also an effective strategy for avoiding being eaten. Now, to finish off this video and our list of interspecific interactions, we have one more form of symbiosis. So we've talked about 3 types of symbiosis. Mutualism is a form of symbiosis, Commensalism is a form of symbiosis, and parasitism is a form of symbiosis. Predator and prey interactions don't fall under the symbiosis heading. Parasitism is also a positive-negative interaction. The difference between parasitism and predator-prey interactions is that typically the parasite is going to be living on the or inside of the body of another organism, which is its host. And in predator-prey interactions, typically the animal is just killing and then consuming its prey. It's not attaching itself to that host for an extended period of time. Another difference is that typically the parasite is going to be much smaller than the host that it's hunting, whereas in predator-prey interactions, usually the predator is the larger organism. Not always. Obviously, you can have packs of wolves take down a much larger animal than themselves, but with parasites, we are talking very, very small organisms can be parasites versus a very large host. Some parasites live inside the host. An example of a human parasite that does this would be a tapeworm. So it sets up shop inside your intestines, and then it grows in length the more it feeds off any of the food that you're taking in. So as food passes through your intestines, it's eating a little bit of that food, and then it's not only going to duplicate itself, it can both reproduce sexually and asexually, tapeworms can, but it also is going to add to its own length as it goes, so they get longer and longer as they go. Examples of parasites that attach themselves to the outside of the host would be mistletoe, that romantic little plant that we hang over doorways, and you meet someone underneath it and you share a kiss around Christmas time, is actually a parasitic plant. It attaches itself to other plants and robs them of nutrients. And sea lampreys, which are they attach themselves onto larger animals, and they sink their teeth in, and then they suck blood as they are moving through the water. Now, I always try to add in some species that are right from around here. So one of the big parasites in our area is ticks, deer ticks in particular. You probably know, if you've ever gone hiking outside, you need to check yourself for ticks after you come in, especially in Chester County or Philadelphia area, because we are in the Lyme disease capital of the East Coast. So here's what some of these ticks look like. and they're really small, so it's easy to miss them. So that's why you have to kind of go through your hair and usually find a buddy to help look yourself over as well. If you look at this map of the United States where areas have been darkened relative to the likelihood of Lyme disease transmission, you can see that the area right around Philadelphia, Chester County, Montgomery County, Lancaster, all these locations down here are right in the center of this large high-risk area right here. So definitely something that we are concerned about. And I have here this table of data for cases of Lyme disease from 2014 to 2018, so pretty recent data. And you can see that the number of cases is pretty high in each of these locations. Looks like Delaware County had the highest rate of transmission for 2015 and 2016, but then Chester County overtook it for 2017 and 2018. So, 2 vocabulary words to describe the kinds of parasites we discussed. On the left here we have a lamprey, which is adding its suction-like mouth to the outside of this fish, grinding its teeth in and sucking out its blood and body fluids. That is an ectoparasite, and the ticks would also be ectoparasites. Ecto means outside of, so external parasites, ectoparasites, ones that attach themselves to the body. And then you have endoparasite. Endo means inside of, and this is a tapeworm that has been extracted from someone's intestines, and they live inside of your body. Endoparasite, inside parasite. Here I have a link to another video which shows another form of parasitism. This is a kind of fungus called cordyceps, which only affects insects, and there's many different types of cordyceps, each one kind of specialized to different types of insects. And what they do is they alter the function of the nervous system to cause the, in this case, ants, to behave differently, and they seek out very, very high ground. They'll climb up and up and up and up. And what happens is once they get high enough on a tree, say, they will sink their teeth into the bark to hold steady, and then the cordyceps fungus will produce a fruiting body, like a mushroom, out of the ant's head, which then spreads its spores over a large area. So the higher the ant crawls up, the more the spores are able to spread. And other ants can kind of recognize that an ant that's infected with this cordyceps fungus is not behaving normally, and they will frequently be killed or removed from the rest of the ant colony in order to save the colony. So sometimes it's referred to as a kind of zombie fungus because it alters the nervous system and it kind of takes over the brain of the ant, and it just tries to spread itself. So it's a very spooky kind of fungus. I believe they actually made a zombie video game where they thought like maybe if there was a kind of cordyceps that could affect humans, that would be a good way to have zombies. Last of Us? Yeah, I think it was Last of Us. So I'm going to link this video in our list for the week as well. It's worth a watch. Just sit back and watch some kind of spooky science going on.